In this video, I want to share with you some mixing mistakes that I made when I first started producing. Let's get into it. What's up, my producer friends? It's David with anothermonsterproductions.com. So there are a lot of videos out there which talk about various techniques to help you get better mixes. And I'm talking about like EQ, compression, all the standard stuff. Also making sure that you're checking your mixes in mono and stereo to make sure they sound good in both. Ways that you can actually make things sound closer or farther away in the mix, and just being aware of the stereo field in general. But in this video, I actually want to talk about something a little bit different. I think this is a subject that's often overlooked, and we're going to be talking about references, metering, and acoustic treatment. As always, I'm going to leave timestamps in the description of this video if you guys want to skip around for any reason. And without further ado, let's get straight into it. So let's talk about referencing. And this is actually a subject that I've talked about on this channel before, but I think it's extremely important. And basically what I mean by this is just finding a track that you like in the real world, that you listen to. You've listened to it on headphones, you've listened to it with earbuds, you've listened to it in the car, you've listened to it at home, you've listened to it in your studio, on your studio monitors, and everywhere you listen to it, it always sounds amazing. So get that track, go ahead and bring it into your DAW, and you're going to use this track as a reference to try and find a similar mix to that. So back in the day when I used to DJ and produce, I was doing a lot of trap and dubstep, stuff like that. And I would spend like all this time working on the mix, trying to get everything good. I was also mastering my own music at the time. And I'd finish everything up, export it, bounce it down to a CD, go listen to it in the car. And I'd be super stoked about the way it sounded. But then I would listen to someone else's mix and I'd realize that my mix sounded super weak, super thin, not nearly as full or as loud as I wanted it to be. And so this is where referencing comes in, because if you can go ahead and know exactly what you're going for from the get-go, then you don't have to do this back and forth of like, oh, well, what did I do wrong? Blah, blah, blah. You can just get straight to it. And it's not going to happen the first time you do it, but it's definitely going to make a drastic difference if you use a reference track from the beginning. All right, so let's talk about some things which I think are important to think about and make sure that you're doing when you're using reference tracks. And number one is, this may seem kind of obvious to a lot of you, but make sure that you're using a reference track that is the same genre as the music that you're producing. So for example, if you're producing dubstep, don't use a future bass track because the sonic quality is different, the drums sound different, and it's just, even though the genres are kind of similar, it's gonna make it a lot better if you just stick to the genre that you're producing. So the second thing is a little bit less important, but I still wanna mention it because I think it might be something for you to kind of think about, and that is to consider what key your reference track is compared to your track. And this is important specifically for the sub bass frequencies, because some of those lower notes are going to resonate in a specific area. And if your reference track's in the key of F and you're producing in the key of D, you're going to have quite a different sort of overall sound, especially in the sub frequencies. So just something to kind of keep in mind. And the third thing that I want to talk about, which I think is probably the most important, is making sure that the volume is the same on your reference track as it is on your mix. And I'm pretty sure they make plugins which can do this automatically for you, but there's also a fairly easy way you can do this by using an LUFS meter. This is Uline Loudness Meter, which is a free plugin. So you guys can get this plugin for free and you can level match the perceived loudness of your mix versus your reference track. And the reason you want to do this is because when you listen to something at a louder level, our brains do something which it makes things seem like they sound better automatically, even though they may not. So again, the whole point of this exercise is to make sure that your track has a similar balance to the other track. So we want to make sure that the volumes are the exact same, or at least as close as possible. All right, so let's talk about acoustic treatment. So a couple years ago, I was working on a project with one of my artists, and at the end of the project, we decided to have like one last mixing session where I got together with my artist, I got together with my engineer, and we went over to his studio, which he has a really nice home studio set up with acoustic treatment and all sorts of stuff. And I brought my setup over there and we kind of went over the tracks. And it wasn't until I had my setup in his space with the acoustic treatment and I was sitting in, the proper listening position that I realized how big of a difference it makes to have acoustic treatment in your studio space. So in that session, I was able to hear everything much more accurately. Like I could tell the difference right away, especially in the stereo field and just in general, it just everything sounded like where it actually was. And so we were able to make really good mixing decisions because of that, and ultimately came up with a much better product than if I had just been mixing it the way that I normally do in my current setup at the time. So ever since that experience, I realized that, I needed to get some acoustic treatment. I started doing a lot more research about it and understanding, how to properly set it up. Of course, I had him help me out with that as well. And I can't really go into too much detail about how, exactly how to set all this stuff up and what you need in this particular video. But I really want to stress the importance of how big of a difference acoustic treatment can make in your room. And actually, I built the panels that I currently have right now from scratch, and I rent a house. So the way that I did it was I built them on frames, which basically the frames just sit on the floor. So I didn't have to mount anything to the walls or anything like that. So if you're worried about that sort of thing, if that's maybe the reason why you're hesitating to do acoustic treatment, you can definitely build this stuff in a way where it's actually pretty cost effective, and you can set it up so that it's both movable and also you don't have to mount it on your walls. So the reason we want to use acoustic treatment is because sound actually works in a similar way to light, where it reflects off of things. So for example, if we just have our bare walls, sound is literally reflecting off of it at certain points and then bouncing off that wall, hitting another wall, bouncing off that one, coming back to our listening position, and it causes all sorts of issues with how we actually hear the music. So we don't actually hear the music in an accurate way when we don't have acoustic treatment set up. So that's the reason for acoustic treatment. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about all the ins and outs of it and how it all works, but if you guys want to learn a little bit more about this, I am going to leave a link in the description to a podcast which I listened to on the subject kind of recently. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you're interested in learning more about it. Now, there are workarounds if you can't afford acoustic treatment or it's just not an option for you. You can use headphones instead, because headphones are going to cut out those reflection points that we're talking about. You're not going to have that because obviously the sound's going straight into your ears. Now, there are problems with using headphones. Of course, headphones can definitely be bad for your hearing if you're not taking lots of breaks, and it's just not necessarily the most ideal way to mix, but you can do it. So that would be, one workaround. Now, if you are using headphones, you definitely do want to make sure that you get a good pair of studio monitor headphones, because that's going to be very important to accurately hear the sound while you're mixing. So the last thing that I want to talk about is metering. And we already kind of touched on this a little bit when I was talking about using the reference tracks. We talked about the LUFS meter that you can get, which is called Ulean loudness meter. But there's another type of metering which I think is very important for mixing, and that is spectrum analysis. So there's this free meter that Voxingo makes called Span, and I highly recommend this plugin. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description of this video if you guys don't have this meter yet. I use it in a lot of my videos, so I'm sure you've probably seen it on this channel if you've watched any of the videos in the past. And the good thing about using spectrum analyzers is you get some visual feedback while you're mixing. So if you use a spectrum analyzer while you're using your reference tracks, then you can kind of see what frequencies are going on in your reference track and then make sure that matches up to your mix as well. So this can kind of be another way to get around the acoustic treatment thing. Obviously, you don't want to rely on your meters too terribly much, but I think they can be a very important tool. And if you use all of these three things together, your mixes are going to sound a lot better, I promise you. So be sure to use meters, be sure to use reference tracks, get some acoustic treatment if you don't already have some as soon as you can. And if you like this video, please go ahead, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell notification. That's going to let you know anytime I release videos in the future. Right now I'm doing a lot of FL Studio tutorials, sound design tutorials, and just production related content in general. So be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Used in conjunction, I'm just suddenly using all these big words.